Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this wonderful Thursday. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar that we're calling Rethinking Compliance and IT in Remote Work. My name is Stu Kippelman, and I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Parsons. It's my pleasure today to welcome you and to be your host for the second webinar in our ongoing series. I'm glad you're able to join us today, and again, happy Thursday. First, a little housekeeping. Today we're using Teams Live for this webinar, and I'm sure you've used it or used something similar. A couple of quick reminders. We would love to answer your questions, so please use the chat icon. There's a little chat icon at the bottom in the toolbar, and if you click it, it will show the chat. And we are going to do our best to answer your questions live. For those of us that are not speaking, we're going to try to answer them live. I will also be posting your questions to our guests, and anything we don't get a chance to answer, we'll follow up with you. Today we have some truly exceptional people who are going to take you through many aspects of compliance in this chaotic environment. Joining me from Parsons is Kim Ervin. She is the Chief Ethics Officer at Parsons, and Mike Chesta, who is our Chief Technology Officer. We also have a very special guest today joining us, Eric Feldman, who is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director for Corporate Ethics and Compliance Programs at Affiliated Monitors, and a much more impressive title than ours, so I'll let him say hello in a few minutes to you all. I want to thank you, Eric, Kim, and Mike, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. It's going to be a great session. As we continue to speak with customers, peers, partners, and others, we have all had challenges in this transition to the post-COVID world. And during these discussions, many have asked us how we've accomplished this, and that is the foundation for why we're decided to do these webinars as a way of sharing the information with you. As I mentioned, this is the second webinar in our series. We plan to have many more, so we'd love to hear your ideas as well for future topics that you're interested in. We've also launched a digital transformation service, which includes these capabilities, and I'll fill you in a little bit about that more at the end. So today we're here to talk about risk and compliance, which of course is a critical topic when we consider how much everything's changing and the frankly craziness that's happening in the world today with COVID and all the other challenges that we're facing. The reality is that businesses adapt and they've launched into their COVID responses. And in many cases, the technology capabilities and teams are being stretched to their limits, which of course we all know increases our exposure to risk. From upgrades to patches to new environments to working at home, everything has changed so quickly and so rapidly. The big question is, how do we maintain compliance in this world of change, and especially when 90% of the company is remote? It's a challenge for all of us. When we think about risk, compliance, security, here at Parsons, we build it in from the ground up. It is not an afterthought or an audit or something that we check boxes off at the end. We work together as a team from the very beginning, and therefore we're all on the same page. We're all working towards the same goal. We're all involved in the projects. And to me, that's the key to solving these issues, which is nothing should change because of all this. The same policies, procedures, controls, and other things that we do to make sure we maintain compliance, security, risk, business continuity is crucial, that it just happens the way it always did. We can't skip steps in dealing with this, right? So let's get into it a little bit. So Eric, I want to welcome you. I appreciate you being here. So can you give us an update on you, yourself, maybe a little quick introduction of you before we start, and get your insights and thoughts into the whole topic?
Sure. Thank you, Stu, and thank you and Parsons for having me today. I attended your first webinar and thought that it was fascinating. And it's nice to see companies that really do feel that their basic policies, procedures, teamwork, and culture are going to get them through these changes. And I'll address that in a moment. I am a retired federal employee. I worked for the feds for 32 years, mostly as an inspector general, retired out of the CIA in 2011. I was the federal IG at the National Reconnaissance Office. I can't imagine the challenges that they're dealing with right now in that kind of an environment, dealing with classified information on a daily basis. Now I am part of a company that does independent assessments of ethics and compliance programs within companies, as well as monitoring when companies have agreements with federal, state, or municipal regulators. And we're finding with our clients that obviously it is not business as usual right now. The changes are almost daily, and there is going to be, and I know this is probably an overused term, but a new normal. Workforces are feeling displaced and detached, feeling somewhat uncertain. Uncertainty in everything, health and well-being, movement restrictions. For many companies and many organizations, a lot of financial insecurity. Supply chains have been disrupted. There are new supply chains in companies having to sign new contracts with unknown companies, new markets that some firms are pursuing in potentially unfamiliar and shark infested waters. Old markets tend to be gone and are closed. Government regulators, who knows what's happening there? It's almost a daily basis where you have to guess which regulations are going to be enforced and which are not. So that uncertainty creates a lot of anxiety. Um, the pandemic, though, really does reveal the true character and culture of a company, I think. Um, it reminds me of the Warren Buffett quote, only when the tide goes out do you find who has been swimming naked. And what that says about a company is what were your underlying fundamentals to start with? Were there challenges there to start with? How strong were those, as Stu said, policies and procedures? How committed is your workforce to the company, and how committed does the workforce perceive the company is committed to them as employees? That is all going to impact how we get through this. When we talk about compliance, though, there's DOJ guidance that came out in April 2017 and was just updated a few weeks ago that talks about the kinds of things DOJ is looking for in a compliance program. None of those things change. The most fundamental one, I think, that affects this conversation is risk. Uh, Compliance programs need to be structured in a way that addresses the most important risks that a company faces. Well, those risks have changed, right? From 3 months ago, a company's greatest risks have turned around completely to something very, very different. Um, Also, controls that exacerbate risk have changed. Uh, Training, how we train our people, how we message, performance incentives, hiring, and due diligence, all of those things have changed pretty fundamentally, I think, over the last couple of months. Not to mention the cyber risk, which I'll let those on the panel with a lot more knowledge of that discuss. Um, I like to look at this in a different way. Those of you who have taken any classes relating to anti-fraud have heard of the fraud triangle, and every single anti-fraud class put on by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has the fraud triangle in it. But I look at that, and it has three sides: rationalization, opportunity, and pressure. And I like to look at it through the lens of the pandemic. So rationalization, what what drives people? What are they thinking about? Well, right now people are disconnected somewhat from their organizations in many places. They're worried about salary. Salaries have been reduced. They may not be getting a bonus this year because of the performance of their companies. They may have lost their job or be at risk of losing their jobs. All of those kinds of things make it easier to rationalize actions that could be misconduct or a violation of a company's code. Pressure, well, uncertainty in the job market, salary cuts, maybe internal pressure from the company to perform and to change your business process and your business model. That can put a lot of pressure on individuals. And lastly, opportunity. There's obviously less oversight when people are working remotely. And they view that, some can view that as an opportunity to do something that perhaps they wouldn't do if they were in the office, if people were monitoring them. There's also, I've seen with some of my clients, a perception of compliance as a low priority right now. We've got bigger fish to fry. You know, the company might be in an existential threat situation, and many are. Compliance is minor. It's an annoyance. The problem is compliance itself can be an existential threat to the company if you don't maintain it throughout all this. So how do we mitigate these kinds of things? Well, first of all, I think we need to make our workforce feel connected. And there are lots of ways of doing it, a lot of which involve technology and innovative use of technology. We need to reinforce our core values and the value of rules. We could have one-on-ones with managers, encouraging the value of that connection and requiring our supervisors and managers to do what they need to do to stay connected. And to me, it ultimately comes down to something that's a bit amorphous. It's corporate culture. How do you maintain your corporate culture when 90% of your workforce is working remotely and you're not in the same place and you're kind of scattered to the winds? That's going to take a little bit of creativity, I think, and a little concerted effort on the part of executives, managers, and certainly the ethics and compliance organization to focus on that kind of thing. Finally, I just want to mention this whole concept of whistleblowing. As a former federal IG, I've been watching with a lot of interest about how whistleblowers have gotten something of a bum rap over the last several months, and IGs themselves have been under fire. Well, my clients are telling me that that is really impacting companies, and it's impacting how companies are getting and receiving information from their employees for fear of them being labeled as whistleblowers, which has taken on a very negative connotation. And I believe that people who come forward to help protect the company, to let the company know that something isn't working right, something's wrong, someone is engaging in misconduct, those aren't whistleblowers. Those are good employees. Those are people that are loyal to your company. That needs to be encouraged and supported. And in this environment, it's even more important that everyone get together, as Stu said, as a team and try to help companies get through this change out to whatever we're going to be on the other side. Again, thank you again for having me, and I look forward to questions and conversation with my co-panelists.
Eric, thank you so much for that opening. I really appreciate it. We all do. I have a very initial question for you. So, when everybody is working remote, how do you get individuals to maintain the compliance that we were able to do in an office? How do you, to your point, what do those communications look like? How do you get people to want to do the right thing?
Well, that's the $64,000 question.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, I mean, even in times of normal times, how do you get people to do the right thing? Well, they have to want to do the right thing. You can have all the rules in the world and all the policies and procedures in the world, but unless your employees feel through the strength of the corporate culture that doing the right thing is just how we do business here, it's who we are as a company, who we are as a work group, then they won't. So the key is, how do we make people feel part of the work group and part of and committed to your company? I can't underscore the value of communication, and it's just regular communication. In our small company, we have about 35 people, and good number of us work remotely anyway, and always have. We have shifted to a concept where myself and the president of our company call and have individual conversations once a week with every single employee for at least a half an hour to find out what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what have they been doing, what are their plans. We communicate our expectations, and that way they feel connected, and we hope will want to do the right thing. That's a starting point. I'm sure there's a lot more.
That's great. Thank you so much. Actually, one more question. Did you find that the companies that you deal with, do you find that for the most part, people are compliant and doing the right thing? Or I don't mean it maliciously. I mean, are they slacking off, or are they maintaining the appropriate compliance that they did before?
Well, the good news is that I really do think that employees are doing the right thing. And the companies that we have been in and doing interviews and focus groups remotely, we're finding that people have really rallied to the moment. And these are, for the most part, organizations, as I mentioned with the Warren Buffett quote, who've been doing that anyway, who have had a strong corporate culture, and that just follows through to this environment. And people are jumping in and doing everything that they can do. Even in companies that have had salary cuts across the board, I've seen employees are doing the right thing. The problem is you're always going to have a few. I mean, just the way the statistics are and the way we look at and understand fraud, you are always going to have, every organization has people that are engaging in misconduct right now. The key is, how do you find those people? How do you get information on it and deal with it in the most productive way so it doesn't spread? And that is a difficult challenge for compliance folks in an environment where people may not feel as willing to report issues up the chain of command.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we'll come back to you in a few minutes. We're going to get a few other thoughts here. So again, thank you for being here. We're glad you're here. Your insights were really good, and we'll get back to you. Kim, so let me introduce Kim Urbanchuk, who's our person in charge of all things that we should be doing right. We work together very closely on a variety of topics. As I said, we don't call Kim in just at the day before we're going to launch something and then say, hey, what do you think? So, Kim, as our chief ethics officer, I welcome you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on the topic.
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me. So I think, particularly at Parsons, we're quite lucky. We have a sort of a very long track record of a robust ethics program, a culture of integrity that really stretches back throughout the company's history. And so when COVID first hit, so to speak, there was a cross-functional working group of executives at the company that got together, and Stu's team was, a huge part of that to get everyone. I believe 90% of our people are now working remote, and it was kind of all hands on deck. And as part of that, we wanted to make sure that people had the tools to remain compliant and to feel secure in times of uncertainty. With working from home and their responsibilities in doing that. So I think the key things that we realized right away was we needed to keep current with very quickly changing landscapes, both regulatory and otherwise, constant communication, consistency, and controls. So there were a few things we did on the communications front right away. My team went out to the entirety of the employee base with a communication to remind everybody all of these working groups, all of these processes and procedures, your ethics officers, your hotline, your trade compliance group, your data security and privacy group, your anti-corruption due diligence group, everyone is still working the same as we always have been. We're still here, and here is how you get in touch with all of us. That was the first thing. We gave some particular guidance around information handling when you're working remotely, as those, working in an office environment that might be secure is very different than working on projects where you've got family members perhaps or roommates at home. Another thing that happened pretty immediately was our CEO did a series of Parsons core value videos for the employee base, and he put out, I believe, one a day or every other day, talking about our core values, how important they are to the company, and how we're going to continue to work in the manner we always have been, just from anywhere, right? So I think we did a really good job of giving people the tools they needed right away to make the transition. Communication, obviously, and training and those types of things have shifted, but I find that we have been really good about leveraging the technologies that Stu, your team, has brought on board, automating certain processes. So for example, with training, I like to give live training. I like to be in a room with folks and tell them about process improvements or procedure changes, and really get in front of them. It's hard to do live training remotely, but what I've done, for example, on our anti-corruption training this year is I'm hosting a series of WebEx sessions that are all live, and then I'll record them and put them up for people that couldn't make any of those sessions, but we try to make it available so there's an interactive format so people can ask questions in real time about some of our processes. Eric spoke earlier about the DOJ guidance that dropped. It was an update to their sort of normal guidance that dropped in April. So we pretty much immediately started benchmarking against that to see if there were any improvements or areas to focus on for this year, making program adjustments, automating features. I think leveraging technology in a remote environment it's been pretty key. So we've been working with our ethics officers on how do you investigate something via computer. Video conference has been great. WebEx, Teams. We have several different communications channels available to us, and just sort of this continuous reinforcement, continuous communication to employees about what resources are open to them, different channels to get in touch with us, has been a focus for us. I have one-on-ones with my whole team every week. That was something I was doing before the shutdown. It's something I'm doing now, and I continue to do in the future. And I think there's been a real focus on one-on-one conversations with managers and their employees lately at Parsons to keep people engaged, keep people having all these things top of mind. And then I think controls is the piece that underpins all of this. So when you're working remotely or you're not in the office together, what controls do you have in place to detect things like irregular payments? Something that is out of the norm on gifts or hospitality. And so we've put in place, along with our SOX compliance push when we went public, all of these different automated controls that loop functions together, procurement and compliance, finance and compliance, to make sure those links are detecting any irregularities across the business. So I think it's an interesting time to be in compliance and ethics. It's a very exciting time, and I think that Parsons has done a really great job in reinforcing the culture of integrity at our company during this time. And I think it's very important, and what I would say and what I tell my friends and my colleagues and my peers, I think you can really tell a lot about a company by the way they treat their people in times of crisis. And I think our ability to pivot to this work from anywhere with the support that people really need just made me really proud to be here. So that's sort of what we've been doing on the ethics and compliance front during COVID. A lot of it we were doing before, and we've just sort of put a lot more focus on the automation, use of technology, and leveraging that. So, but it's been quite an interesting time. So.
Oh, it definitely has been. we're living it. Hey, so I have a question for you, and of course I know the answer, but I was wondering if you can share with everyone. So within Parsons, we have a very strong culture on doing the right thing, supporting communities, making sure that we focus on employee health as well as our customers and our customers' health. And but for companies that want to improve in risk and compliance, how do you get the culture to get to that openness and transparency? As Eric said, the whistleblowing is, to me, not a negative thing, right? It should be viewed as transparency, right? So how does a company, what are some ideas for how a company improves and gets there? I think you may be on mute.
Okay, am I now off mute?
Yeah, okay. You're good. You're good. Yeah, I do it all the time. Don't worry.
There's quite a lot that goes into what, how is a corporate culture, and corporate cultures develop over years and years. And I think there's several things I can recommend about how to get there if that needs to go a different place. Like I said, I think we're very fortunate here that it's kind of baked in our cake, so to speak. But you'll always hear things about tone at the top, right? You need your executives to be not just talking the talk, but walking the walk and communicating with employees, not just their direct reports, but the whole company, about expectations in terms of integrity, compliance, ethics, all of those things. And a lot of companies do that, and they do it well. You also need tone at the middle. So it can't just be, the top C-suite or what have you, talking to folks. It also needs to be your managers. Managers of people is where your employees will turn first. So you need to create that open door sort of loop between employees, management, teams. I think it's really helpful to have multiple channels of communication open to employees. So we have, for example, a hotline, an anonymous reporting mechanism that's by phone or the internet via web intake. But we also have, an ethics committee made up of 4 of us that sort of hear every ethics issue that's brought up. People can reach out directly to us. We have, 20 some odd ethics officers around the globe that people can reach out to and talk to. We have employee relations. We have our people department. We have, first line managers and their managers, and we really encourage an open dialogue with all of those groups. And there's no one way to raise an issue. However you feel comfortable is how you should raise an issue. We also have a no retaliation, zero tolerance for retaliation policy, and I think that's incredibly important. People should not be afraid to bring forth, good faith reports or concerns or questions about a business practice or something they see that doesn't sit right with them. And we've historically been very open to those. We encourage those. We encourage reporting, and we have a feedback loop to the reporter. So, in a lot of places, someone will report something and they say, nothing happened. I reported it, nothing happened. And so we make sure we close the loop with the person that's raising the issue or has the question or whatever the case may be, to let them know what we found and what happened in that case. We also build those real life examples into our trainings every year so that people can really understand, oh, I think I heard about that and oh, that might have affected us in this way, and it was dealt with, or this is what happened with it. So I think communication is always key. The minute that you stop communicating with your employees, I think the culture has a tendency to suffer. So I think that would be where I would start, is really focusing on that if you're trying to build sort of a speak up, what we call a speak up culture.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Eric, do you have any other, on that same topic about the culture, any other guidance, advice for a company that might be, following up on what Kim had said and what you had said earlier around the whistleblower, like how do you get a company to, I'm really, like Kim said, I'm really proud of Parsons and how we deal with these things here, that from our CEO down, we don't view it negatively. We view it as information that we need to act upon. But how do you, how does a company that maybe has a culture that it's bad and it's negative, and if a complaint comes in, they react crazy and want to fire people, right? Which is rarely the answer. Well, what's your advice for those companies, or maybe not, not to the CEO, but to the chief ethics officer or the security or risk or the IT departments, right? What's your guidance to them?
Well, first of all, listening to Kim is music to my ears, because what she's describing is a company that is doing all the right things. And I'm not pandering to my host here, but all the things that Kim is outlining and ways that she works to build and reinforce a culture are the things we try to get companies to do. And in the case where you have a company where people don't feel they can come forward, if they feel they're going to be retaliated against, even if there's no record of retaliation, when people aren't talking to one another, you have a culture that is challenging and that drives behavior. So the number one thing that I look at in a company is, what are the incentives? How are the incentives in the company structured? And if the only thing that the company incentivizes with its performance appraisals, bonus determinations, promotions, if it is only financial success, only financial metrics, not core values balanced with those things, then you see the fundamental issue. What gets measured gets done. And if the company is not telling its supervisors and managers that we care about our people and we want you to make them feel connected, and you're going to get judged on how well you build that team and communicate, if that isn't occurring, then you've got an issue. So the way to fix it is to change the performance management and incentive process.
Yeah, I agree with you. As a matter of fact, I worked for a company prior to this that had that completely flipped around the financial performance as a metric, right? So it was the number one goal of the company was our customers and the people who use the products. Number two was employees. Number three was the community. And then if we did all of the above correctly, the shareholders will see a return, right? And you never saw a financial metric or anyone talk about the stock price or anything, right? So I think that's part of the culture as well, that we, that's so important to push, right? So, yeah, thank you. So let's quickly switch over to a little bit about the technology, which obviously, at Parsons, we try to focus on the business first and then the technology, right? Because I always say if you got a bunch of IT people that are deciding on the business needs, it doesn't necessarily go all that well. So let me introduce to you Mike Chesta. Mike is our Chief Technology Officer in IT for Parsons. And Mike, you and I spend a whole lot of time talking about this topic, which is appropriate, which is what we should be doing exactly, right? So can you fill us in on, with all of the risk and the compliance that that most companies have, how do we kind of mitigate that using the technology as an enabler, right? It's not about the technology, so please.
Sure, Stu, I'd be happy to, and I appreciate being invited to speak with the panel this morning. I think for those of you that came to this session wanting a deep discussion about technology in the face of compliance, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. And I say that tongue in cheek, but really there isn't a single killer technology that we or anybody else are using to manage our compliance obligations. Compliance is really less about technology and more about the sound processes, the implementation of practical controls, and then as we've been discussing here during this session, the willingness of people to speak up and address issues before they become issues, right? So that the framework the control baseline can change, modify, etc. I will, though, talk a little bit about a few of the things we're doing really because of COVID and how that shaped our thinking a little bit differently. Our security group and compliance group deserves a lot of credit for this next area I'm about to get into. Compliance can be very complicated, and there's numerous frameworks and volumes of pages of material to comply with. But one of the things our compliance group did post-COVID is they created a unified security control baseline. And basically what that does is it normalized all the different compliance frameworks that are in scope to our business. So whether it's ISO or NIST or the forthcoming cybersecurity maturity model or CMMC, we now have that in a unified document. And the value with that for our technical teams is it's really simplified their life. They can work more efficiently. They understand now where there might be gaps between the different frameworks that are out there. And that's letting them focus more on the inherent risk. The other side benefit that we received from that is we're really able now to focus more on improvements to employee experience in the context of compliance. And sometimes compliance, security, and IT controls are at odds with employee experience. One of the benefits of this environment is kind of taking a fresh stop, if you will, at the decisions of the past. Now that we have to make some changes for various reasons, we're looking at what does that really mean to user experience? Do we really have the controls in place that we think we have? Are employees able to comply with it, et cetera? And it's been instrumental to help us maneuver down that path. From an external perspective, kind of pivoting to our customers' point of view, we do a lot of business with the federal government, as I think many of you know. And one of the things we've seen from our kind of federal customers, in some cases, is kind of stricter adherence to the use of compliant, technologies, mainly cloud technologies. While in other cases, it's actually been the opposite. There's been a more liberal use of cloud technologies. So as these come up, we're really working with our customers to validate fit and make sure we as a company aren't forced into a direction that we don't want to be forced into. But we've also been open and had to make some changes and be flexible to the way we've implemented some of our solutions. And collaboration's been one of the areas I know that we've been struggling with. I'm sure some of you out there have as well. We've really been working and had, first of all, the support from our executives, as Kim mentioned. When we wanted to turn something off, we'll keep the names out to protect the innocent. We actually turned off some technology in the May timeframe, April-May timeframe. We've re-enabled it, but that came at some heartburn. And the good news is the executives backed the decision. They owned the decision, which made that easier. Now we've worked through that, and everybody's happy and moving on their way. Maybe the last thing I'd bring up here is now that we're in this highly work from home kind of position, we've really placed a high priority on identity and configuration management programs. And from an identity perspective, right, who you are, where you are, the device you have is really now a much more important set of metadata about what you should or shouldn't have access to. And as I mentioned, as our workforce is becoming more remote, those data elements are helping us now to refine how we permit or deny somebody access into the environment. It's definitely not complete. We have a lot more work to do. We're just at the very kind of beginning of that. But we have a focus program. The executives understand it, and they understand how that will help us with our compliance mandates. The last element here is really configuration management, right? And this is going to sound very mundane, but we're being extremely vigilant with what our endpoint management solutions and how we patch systems, right? So you no longer have everybody within the boundaries of the firewall, right? Everybody's out and about, and that's been the case for some time. But we really believe that the endpoint and focus on the endpoint is a way to thwart a lot of issues. And we're really spending time to make that experience, I think, more elegant than we currently are able to. And kind of just as a final takeaway here, we really believe that the more capabilities, especially automated capabilities, that the IT team and security team, because we're in this together, can provide, the better our compliance and security posture will be for the company. And so we're really overweighting a lot of our decision-making calculus on the side, on the scoreboard, if you will, for those technologies that are able to give us better insights quickly. So that, again, we can take action and ultimately protect our company, protect our customer, and the constituents that we're working with. And with that, Stu, I'll hand it back over to you this morning.
Mike, thank you. That's great. As you're talking, I'm thinking about all the projects and programs that we put in place to deal with COVID, and for those that may not know this or may not have been on the first call, we went from an average of hundreds of people that were connecting remotely. We're not a bad thing, but we were. I mean, it was a good thing. We were a very in-person company, and now probably 90% of the company is remote. And so we went from hundreds of people connecting remotely to, well, pretty much tens of thousands, right? So, and one of our big topics was around security and compliance and risk, and we've spent a lot of time on business continuity planning and making sure that, because it actually, in the past, if 200 people couldn't connect a night, well, it wasn't good, but the world didn't end. Now, if the same solution were to fail, you would take down the entire company, right? And so that pressure pushes on the compliance and risk pressure, because you're willing to, in some ways, take more risks to get it out for the purpose of taking less risk to have it to keep it operational, right? So, you want to share a little bit about how we thought through that, or I'm kind of setting you up a little bit, right? So,
Sure. So yeah, I think the first element here is we definitely had to run a project quickly, and we had to add capacity, overnight. And the first thing we really did was it's really communication, but we created a team that had the right people on it, network engineers, security engineers, and such. And that was the only job we gave them, first of all, and said, until we get this in place, this is your only job. We made their life very simple. That also let them communicate, and they knew they were working in an agile kind of framework. So we had the concept of a minimum viable product, but that wasn't where we were going to end. So the good news with that is we were able to get the product out and support the company's mandates to overnight go from hundreds to many, many thousands working from home. But the project didn't stop, and it's still not completed, actually. We're still iterating through the elements of that program to provide additional features, capabilities, and controls. So I would say that's one element that I think has worked well for us, is that we had to go fast, but we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. We had a plan to address things programmatically and not complete the program until all the stakeholders, whether it's IT, security, compliance, or aligned. I think the other thing that we did that was really important, especially at the beginning of COVID, was we had a broader kind of, I don't want to use the word town hall in IT, that really wasn't what it was, but it was a group of the security, IT professionals and compliance professionals that got together really daily while the initial COVID elements were happening. And the whole premise of that meeting was, what are our customers asking for? Do we understand what they're asking for? What's the risk involved with it? And should we, what's the right decision? And we had some very quick, because everybody knew what their mission was. We had very quick, thorough, and concise conversations, and we were able to not only handle the requests, but we were also then doing it the right way by keeping an entry in the risk register, so we knew we had to come back to it at some point and deal with it in the right, maybe long-term solution. So I think that's a long maybe answer to your question, Stu.
No, I appreciate it.
I really think it's how we set up the teams for success and communicated.
Yeah, no, that covers it great. So let me flip to a question for both Eric and Kim. So hopefully this all gets better, and I'm being cautiously optimistic here, not trying to be naive, but hey, hopefully this all gets better and we all get back to work. And I think the world did change, and a lot of people, including Parsons, view things differently on variety topic, and including reducing our burden on facilities and people in one location, and providing employees more flexibility. We don't call it work from home anymore. We call it work from anywhere, right? So I think the definition of the home changes as well, right? So, however, let's just pretend that I'm completely wrong, and things get worse again, and we go into lockdown again, which sadly, I don't think we're very far from, based on the news. What else has to change? Considering, if you think about it, that this is not going to be a one-time event, right? So with that in mind, what aren't we doing that we need to be to make this a long-term? It wasn't a one-time shot, right? To make this a long-term solution. Eric?
Sure. Am I on?
Yep, you're on.
Here we go. Okay.
There you go.
Yes. Well, what can we do? Well, first of all, I think every organization, every person, myself included, has put certain things off, thinking that this is temporary. Once we get back to normal, we'll resume normal operations. We'll start doing things again that we did before. And I really do think we have to stop thinking that way. That the longer we put things off, the more risk we're going to have. And I'm not sure things will ever get back to the way we were. And granted, you're an optimist too. I'm a professional skeptic, and I'm thinking things are not going to go back to the way we were before. I'm also in Southern California, and our numbers are horrible. And I think we're on the precipice of going back to where we were in the middle of March. So we have to think, how do we do these things differently? Before we started this morning, we were talking a little bit about training. A lot of companies, some companies have put off training. They're waiting for things to get back to normal. I don't think we can. I think we have to find innovative solutions and develop the technologies to allow for different training techniques while people are, as you say, working from anywhere. And we have to continue those. And the training is going to look different, certainly. It's going to be different. Our communications are different. But I certainly think we're up to the challenge to come up with ways of doing things we did before in a very different remote way.
That's great. Anything to add to that, Kim?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Eric said, and I would sort of note that I know that we haven't really looked at it so much as a temporary thing at Parsons. We're really looking at
Right.
For the extended long term, what can we change, not just for right now to shore up a gap right now, but for the next new normal, right? I think the thing I keep thinking is just keep your foot on the gas, right? So keep communicating, don't let it slack off. Don't think because you did one training session, then you can just sort of let it lie for another year or so. I think consistency is key, and constant engagement is really going to keep a more virtual workforce connected. And you got to put effort into that. This is not, it can't be a check the box exercise where everyone does their ethics training for the year and then you don't hear from your compliance people anymore. So I think constant engagement and keeping your foot on the gas is really the name of the game in this brave new world we're in.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I would actually admit that in the very beginning at Parsons, we probably did think of it as a one-time thing. But then very quickly we realized this is not a one-time event, and everything we did going forward, we did for the long term. So from technology to business process to where people work is all about the long term. Time for one last question, I think, that we got from one of our attendees. which is a great question. We spent a lot of time on performance metrics, evaluating people, discussing things with people. We have global town halls. We have individual town halls. I within IT, you had mentioned you have staff meetings every week, so do I. And then, we have a large IT organization. We spend quite a lot of time communicating with them. And we actually do Teams Live with the IT department, where we have different people who present, different project owners who present updates, right? So we try to keep everyone in the loop. But the question is, when you think about someone's individual performance and the metrics about how to stay compliant and how to not add risk, I'd love each of you to give your opinion, recommendations on how do we make sure individual performance. What are the metrics? How is it tracked? And how do we, get people to want to do the right thing? Eric, you want to start with that?
Sure. Well, I think Kim set it up great when she talked about tone at the top, mood in the middle, and buzz at the bottom, recognizing that the communication from every level of the organization is going to impact the culture and impact behavior. So how do you translate that into individual performance metrics? Well, instead of just looking for people who metrics of your business unit or your sales, or in the case of some of the bad cases, places like Wells Fargo, where the business metric was how many accounts were cross-sold within each of the branches, and what gets measured gets done, and people were opening up accounts and the names of dead people, and that's a whole nother story we could go on for an hour. But instead of those kinds of metrics that get at whether a supervisor is an ethical role model. How often is that supervisor communicating the company's core values and ethics to her or his staff? What kind of a work environment are they setting? How do they deal with issues? These are the things that need to be looked at, rated as part of a performance appraisal, and taken into consideration upon promotion. Many of us have worked for organizations where somebody gets promoted to a coveted position, maybe at a vice president level of a company, or in a federal agency to a director level, and the workforce looks at that person and says, "Huh? How could that happen? How did that person get promoted? He runs roughshod over the workforce. He's nasty. He maybe he's even engaged in harassing activity, and yet they promote him because he has contributed financially or in some other way to the company." What we want is for people to be promoted who people see, well, that is what the company's looking for. That's exactly the kind of leader that the company wants to see. And it just builds on activity, and you have more and more people then that strive to be like that leader. That's the way I think you can approach it.
That's great. And Kim, do you want to add anything? And actually, I'd love to ask you to make some a bit of a closing, a bit of a close here, and some last minute advice.
Sure. I think, again, echoing everything Eric said, I think you got to spend the time to develop your people, train your people. A lot of ethics and compliance can be intuitive. In certain cases, a lot of it isn't. Some of the regulatory stuff, people don't know what they don't know, and you got to make sure they have the tools to succeed. Like I said, one-on-one conversations with management are great. We have a mentoring program that's very helpful, I think, in developing those soft skills and developing people into leaders. So I think, again, you know, in these times, the most important thing that we can do is communicate our expectations, our resources to our people, keep fostering that culture of integrity, keep enforcing our core values, which I think we do very well, keep our controls in place and make sure they're working smoothly, like Mike said, and making sure things are automated, accessible. There's that good user experience for our employees so they don't get frustrated trying to use a tool and give up. And then just keep your foot on the gas. I mean, this is the new normal, so gotta just keep it going.
Yeah, you're right. I'd love to go another hour, but this brings us to the end. I do want to thank Eric, Kim, and Mike for their time, and I hope this was helpful to everyone who attended. As I mentioned earlier, we've kind of launched this as a service, so that we can, you know, we've done a lot of stuff internally, but we've decided to engage directly with our customers on this. Engagements can span anywhere from myself and the IT team to really to any other area within the scope of what we're talking about. So like we live this and we get it, and you know we're happy to help. If you're interested, we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to see a recording of this, both please go to our website, parsons.com/innovation. And thank you, everyone. Thank you who attended, and we hope you have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, Stu.
Thank you.